Further down it reads, the same survey shows that 37% of young women and 41% of trans and non-binary people who are homeless will experience sexual assault, compared to just 8% of men.
Again, I don't trust this data because this is probably feminist research, that's number one. Number two, men tend to underreport.
Okay, so by that metric, we can now ignore every single source you have. If all it takes for me to disregard any of your sources is to just not trust them, then that's it. Like, you want to have like an honest intellectual conversation, you need to be able to address all of these things in good faith. Why should I trust anything you have to say now, if you're not going to give me or my sources the same benefit of the doubt without checking them? For the record, like, I appreciate that you put all your sources in the description, so are mine. Mine are in the description as well. If you want to take them one by one and deconstruct them, like, knock yourself out. But if you're just going to be like, nah, I don't trust them, okay, don't trust them. This is the level of intellectual integrity that we're working on now. Okay, so a quick recap, everybody. A year ago, I make a video on MGTOW where I try to genuinely address some of the arguments I've heard from MGTOW, try to address them fairly, to represent them accurately, and then I give a critique. And I do so, and this is really important to say, like, while I do consider myself a feminist, I'm also just really talking about it from a leftist perspective, and this is going to be important. So anyway, because of like the latest push in the algorithm that I got from my Metatron video, I guess some Manosphere dudes with very small channel, basically as small as mine really, they stumbled on it, and now they're starting to make their own responses video. So first we covered, was it yesterday? There was this guy, City Crusher, Metatron obsessed guy gets cool on men's issues. We went over it in a previous live stream, so I'm not going to again. Another guy from that niche talked to me. This is a shield for men. And yesterday I wrote to him like the same comment I did with City Crusher, where I asked him if he was willing to discuss some of these issues. I don't know if he responded to my last one. Let's see. No, he still didn't. We got into a beef this morning, basically because like he was really hammering hard on like my views on circumcision, but he's pretty much doing the same mistake that the other guy did, which is that he's coming in hard, like really to fight on the circumcision issue, but like completely missing my point that I was making in the video. What I will say broadly, and this is something that I want to say sincerely to both this guy that we're going to be reacting to, A Shield for Man, and City Crusher, I understand that you guys are in your own bubbles. I understand that you guys are like deeply invested in your own movement, but you also need, at least I strongly encourage you to take the videos and their intent for what they are. You know, you can call me a male feminist that is fundamentally part of a hate movement, and you can associate me with all the most extreme examples of feminism, of radicalism that you can think of, but you really need to take into account like what I'm trying to do with this video. What I was trying to do with the video, even if we don't agree, what I was trying to do is actually address the arguments fairly. Like I went out of my way to try and make sure that the arguments that I'm talking about, that I really understand them, that I really understand the perspective behind it before bringing up my own arguments. It's a bit disappointing that you guys would not at least try to approach my video as it was done the exact same way. You're not coming in trying to understand my criticisms, you're just coming in looking to destroy, interpret me in the least charitable way. I really do think you're doing that, because I generally think like, even if you don't think I'm right on some of the things I say, like, you're not even addressing my arguments properly. Like, you misinterpret or purposefully twist, I don't know, a lot of the things I say, and, you know, I'm all for having a conversation, but in the case of City Crusher, he straight up said that no data I have will ever be acceptable because he thinks I'm just part of a movement. That could just be cope. I think it actually just cope. I think that he's hiding. If you think my arguments are bad, you shouldn't just have to say they're bad. You should probably be able to destroy them comfortably, especially for a live conversation. To Shield for Men's credit, he did say in the comments that he would be willing to talk to me, especially when it comes to circumcision. But even then, the problem I'm seeing here is that he seems to still be not so much discussing my arguments, but what he thinks my arguments on circumcision are. So this is the video. I watched it in two parts. I watched it last night. I had a moment at work when I was back in the office doing paperwork, and I could just listen to it, and then I listened to the other half this morning. Let's get to it. Response to a response again, like. And here I am. This is my live stream from Monday, by the way.
Hello and welcome. Today is another good day where I absolutely destroy a male feminist. So yeah, so City Crusher made this video against a guy called Do Get Out. This guy is apparently a male feminist. And now he has made this response to City Crusher's response. Now I'm gonna only respond to the video City Crusher responded to, which was about MGTOW and men's issues and so on and so forth, where Do Get Out spouted a bunch of nonsense, okay? And I basically like address 4 parts of that video. I will not go through the whole video because it's 1 hour long. And I'm not gonna go through this live stream here either because it's 3 hours long and that would take too much time. However, what I'm basically going to do is comment quickly on his so-called response to City Crusher bringing up the White Feather campaign, right? So let's hear this quickly.
So the government started doing conscription, the government lowered the enlisting age, and the government started the White Feather campaign. Who was running the government? Who?
Look how smug this guy is, how he thinks he's making a good point here. Oh, the White Feather campaign? As conscription was actually done by the government, which was, of course, made up of men, and therefore it's men's fault. And, oh, the White Feather campaign, the idea for that was created by some admiral. Wow, amazing. Except that we already agree that men can also discriminate against other men. So all this guy just did was knocking down a straw man. Okay?
Okay, I understand that you acknowledge that other people, that men were also part of that campaign, but I think it's pretty important. The context in which City Crusher brings it up is to say that, like this is how women have oppressed men. But it's like, if it's not exclusively women doing it, then is it really something you can blame exclusively on women then? Like, when you're talking about the White Feather campaign, you're talking about women shaming men, and you use this as a way of women, like, using their power to oppress men. Like, I get that, but if other men were also involved in that campaign, in fact started it, then it kind of takes away from the argument, is all I'm saying.
That's number one. Number two, it is still totally valid to bring up the White Feather campaign in order to show how women also contribute to male oppression, okay?
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but in the context of this specific situation, the problem is that if you're looking at like the timeline in the history of that campaign, there's a whole bunch of things that lead up to men being sent in a war to die. We agree with that. The problem is that in the way City Crusher is bringing it up, he's trying to omit that part. Women did not declare, were not in positions of power to declare war. Women were not in a position of power to declare conscription. And women were not in a position to go to war themselves, even if they wanted to help their country. This is also something else that you can read when you go like further down, and it explains that the feminists of the time, the suffragettes and whatever, they actually put their own struggle for liberation on pause during World War I to instead focus on what they can do to help the country. Don't get me wrong, like shaming men into joining the war, like totally bad. But I'm just saying, if it's not coming exclusively from women, and you're talking about how they can also be part of men's oppression, that implies by itself that men are also oppressing themselves. But again, this is still in the context of a patriarchy in which men are expected to go to war and die, and that's one of the ways in which the patriarchy is oppressing men in this regard. I already made that point, and it was pretty clear. I think he's just trying to reemphasize the same thing. The oppression is coming from where? The patriarchy, but you'll get into that too.
Okay. And the White Feather campaign was a campaign made up of women, a lot of women from all over the country, including feminist suffragettes, okay? Prominent feminist suffragettes. Or are you going to say, oh, these feminist suffragettes that are so revolutionary and, they're like fighting against the patriarchy and all that, all of a sudden they also work for the patriarchy simultaneously?
Yes. It is entirely possible. You can see many examples of that throughout history of people working against their own self-interest. I think you're German, Shit for Men. What do you make of the Polish Jewish police in the Warsaw Ghetto, like Jewish collaborators during World War II under Nazi Germany? There are countless periods in history where you'll see people actively working against their own self-interest or being even collaborators in some regards. We'll get into it because, like, one of the things he tries to do, and to an extent City Crusher was doing it too, is trying to compress every branches of feminism and every woman who's ever labeled themselves as a feminist, regardless of what their politics are, regardless of the time period or culture, they try and all put it into this one singular movement that stands for everything behind it and never like criticizes. There's never any internal conflicts. And this is one of those things that I would talk about personally, because when I consider myself a feminist, you think I consider myself a feminist in the same way that feminists 100 years ago would define themselves as feminists? Of course not. There are feminists 100 years ago who were also eugenics, who wanted feminism for white women, and, you know, black women were still seen as inferior. You know, there are a lot of instances like that, and suffragettes using their position within the patriarchy to shame men to serve the country, to me, that's completely ridiculous. I condemn it. But the only reason I'm arguing here is because, again, if you want to use this example to talk about women oppressing men, then you also need to take into account that most of the oppression that led to the White Feather Campaign was done by men in power, was done by the patriarchy, still, you know, and you just gotta deal with that.
So these suffragettes, they're fighting against the patriarchy, quote unquote, but they also work for the patriarchy. Mm-hmm. How does this make any sense?
Okay, well, I just explained this. We're just going to move on.
You see how easy it is to debunk this clown. But anyway, let's go also show some other sources, right? So this is an anti-suffragette poster or pamphlet. It's a historical document. And the anti-suffragette movement was made up of a lot of women, majority-wise women, if I remember correctly. And they were against female suffrage because under male suffrage, women were exempt from military service. They saw that as a good thing. They were fighting against including women in the draft because getting drafted is not exactly a privilege. It is a burden. A burden, all right?
Yeah, I agree. One of the things about the patriarchy is that what it's done consistently is portray men as the providers, the fighters, the protectors, the saviors, and it's portrayed women as subservient, as homemakers. In that situation where you're talking about like male disposability and stuff like that, what we're talking about is the reason women are not getting drafted is because culturally they are seen as weak and needing protection. You can't break down how that process came to be. And to be honest, like it's going to be really complicated. This is not necessarily something that I'm going to break down now, but this is what I'm talking about. When it comes to this specific thing, I mean, I understand that he's making the same point, but I don't know. Husband must pay wife's bills, whether for the family or for her own personal expenses. Like, I don't know when this thing was. Special privileges New York women have suffered under male suffrage. That seems to be like a fairly old thing. I think he said it was a while ago. I'm not sure. But like, and this is in New York State, okay? It was illegal for women to have bank accounts while this was written. So it's not so much that men are obligated to pay. They're obligated to pay because women have no legal means to pay for themselves. We can't get stuffed like on every single thing, but I really find it stupid that it says like, you know, this is a special privilege that women have. It's a privilege to be able to own your own house. It's kind of a weird framing for the start, isn't it? A special privilege? Why is it not just like a fundamental right? When they're talking about equal rights, that just means that now women can do it too, but it's still being framed as a special privilege? Are you for real? Anyway.
And women were contributing to men's burden. Okay, they didn't want to share that equally. As history has shown, even with female suffrage, there was still no mandatory draft for women, by the way. Then here's also a very good article showing all kinds of historical.
This is from nomormisandry.blogspot.com. Does that sound like a unbiased website? Oh, sorry. I'm just going to bring it down because he's done with me. No More Misandry. That's the website. Yeah, I'm sure it's very reliable. I'm sure it doesn't have a bias of its own at all. Okay, well, he's basically going to the same thing, like just another instance of women shaming men into war. Like, I already explained the dynamic behind that. I already said that, like, on its own, like, I totally, like, condemn it. But I also just condemn, you know, being drafted and conscripted, and I am generally anti-war. So it's not like there's a contradiction in my beliefs here anyway. I'm just, like, if you're going to bring up the draft to say that's an instance of male oppression, I would just tell you, yeah, I agree, let's end it. But I feel like a lot of these guys, they don't have any real policies to solve it. They just want to be using it to complain that they're the ones who are oppressed. If that's not the case, like, why aren't they talking about, like, ending the draft? You know, he will complain a lot in this video about instances where women could have been included in the draft and then feminists showed up to oppose it. And that's true. Why aren't you just opposing the draft instead of complaining about women opposing their own contribution? It's like you just want to, you know, point out at their hypocrisy, but okay, what's your belief? Because I feel like a lot of these guys, if they had it their way, they would not end the draft. They would just make it happen to women also, just so when there's a war, they can fantasize themselves like looking over the battlefield with a bag of popcorn, so that when a woman struggles through like you know, military training or military combat or whatever, they can just be like, ha, you see, these women are weak. Like, I know they'll never actually say that, and it's entirely possible I'm just making all of this up, but again, like, what I would like is some actual policies here. Do you want to abolish the draft, yes or no? If it's yes, then great, we agree. That's what I want, and there's a lot of feminists who just want to end the draft also.
It is total nonsense. I have made fun of this concept here in this post, this satirical post here. The patriarchy is the explanation for everything. It is like...
Yes, his approach to addressing the patriarchy is citing his own post, which he, by his own admission, is satirical. Also, is it... I'm not German. Is this 12 minutes? He posted that like right before recording the video just so he could bring it up when making his video. Again, like I understand he doesn't believe the patriarchy to be a real thing. I mean, he's entitled to his opinion, but that's just... If the opposite is that we live in a matriarchy, as City Crusher said, that is demonstrably false as well. Yeah, thanks, Good Love. So yeah, he made that post 12 minutes before posting just so we could bring it up in this video about me. Well, I appreciate the effort.
Theory because it's unfalsifiable, because no matter what, you can just say patriarchy and it explains everything. You cannot falsify it. If men have disadvantages, that's patriarchy backfiring. If women have supposed disadvantages, that's also patriarchy. So no matter what, patriarchy. Totally unfalsifiable nonsense.
Okay, so the first thing we need to understand here is that patriarchy is one of the things that manifest in society, and sometimes, a lot of times it benefits men, and there are instances in which it oppresses men, it hurts men, and there are instances where it's going to quote-unquote benefit women, and it's also going to oppress them. Like, the idea generally is that patriarchy hurts both. When I make an argument, for example, about toxic masculinity, and we talk about the expectation in men to be always, you know, tough and, you know, always be strong and always be competitive and always be, you know, strong and violent, a lot of men can't live up to those expectations, and the distress it causes them can be very bad for their health over their lifetime. This is a result of the patriarchy, and that's one of the ways in which patriarchy hurts men as well. So when we're talking about deconstructing the patriarchy, this is one of the ways in which we're talking about actually helping men. What is that guy's solution for the taboo of men being emotionally vulnerable? What is that guy's solution to end homelessness? What is that guy's solution to end men dying in wars? You know, there's so many more things that are so much more complicated than that.
Basically, as if women have zero influence on society and are just passive bystanders, except, of course...
Again, this is not an argument I've ever made. Women can be collaborationists in a patriarchy. Women can hold positions of power in a patriarchy. Women can be against feminism. There are women who are anti-feminists. And there are women who use whatever position they have to, you know, to their advantage. Like, those sort of things happen, but it still doesn't override the broader problems at work here.
When they're doing something good, right? Men do everything evil, women do everything good.
No, that's, again, I never made that argument. It's a straw man.
It's almost as if this is like a conspiracy theory to villainize, to demonize men, and to put hyper agency on men. Yeah, but okay.
No, like, in my worldview, both men and women work together to make the world better, and that means they both work towards dismantling the patriarchy, because it helps both of them. For women, it gives them more opportunities. It means they're not restricted to, like, the regular gender roles they would be associated with, and then it gives that same power to men. Both benefit here. This is also why, like, you know, they like to label me a male feminist and then say that I'm part of a hate movement, so basically they think of me as like a traitor for men. Tell me what my positions are, like, what are my views that are actually hurting men? Because all my policies are about trying to make the world as good as possible for everyone else. I'm not just a feminist, I'm a leftist. I approach this from many different angles.
Let's go to his actual video. Yeah, so please. This is the video I've talked about. MGTOW, how to trivialize men. And again, City Crusher already made a very good response to this video, but I think I just should also respond to this video, because why not? And by the way, City Crusher and I are not part of the quote-unquote manosphere, and we're not red pillars or whatever, right?
Okay, so just so we address this, because he's saying like, oh, we're not red pillars, we are men's rights activists. I'm sure, Wikipedia is a feminist platform, so they won't agree here, but the Manosphere is a very collection of websites, blogs, online forums promoting masculinity, misogyny, opposition to feminism. Communities within the Manosphere include literally the first one, men's rights activists, MRAs, also incels, men going their own way, which I'm talking about, pickup artists, and fathers' rights groups. Like, you may say to yourself, well, I'm not part of the Manosphere, I'm not part of the red pill community, I'm like MRA, like that's part of the Manosphere. While the specifics of each group's beliefs sometimes conflict, they do, they are generally united in the belief that society is biased against men due to the influence of feminism, and that feminism promotes misandry, hatred of men. That is literally your position. And yes, all of these groups, incels, MGTOW, MRA, and, all these new weirdos online from all the podcasts, Fresh and Fit, Myron Gaines, like he's right here, Andrew Tate, like you're all part of the same broader movement, which is we're men and we think we're being oppressed and we hate and blame women and feminism for it. Like, this is part of your group. You can't distance yourself from it. And I think that's really important to acknowledge this, because throughout his video, he's just associating me with all the worst elements of feminism that I don't agree with. If you don't agree with incels, by your own standards, you should still acknowledge that they're part of your group.
We are men's rights activists. We are pro-male activists. Okay? But yeah, this dumbass...
Yeah, and you're still in the Manosphere.
Obviously.
And this is the thing also, is that a lot of the arguments he's making are going to be from the perspective of his own MRA lens. My video was addressing MGTOW specifically, so sometimes there's a lot of disconnect between what I'm actually saying, the points I'm actually making, and the things that he's trying to make them about. Anyway.
He didn't do any research on us, right? Because he doesn't do any research, actually. He just says, oh, I have the data. Yeah, we'll see how valid this data actually is, and whether or not you can actually read data and represent data correctly, right? But yeah, let's watch this nonsense here and I'll rip it to shreds.
The male homeless. In this video, Spetsnaz talks about the struggle of homeless men and how being homeless is a vicious cycle that is very hard to escape. If anything, that video is pretty good at humanizing homeless people and explaining just how...
Homeless men, okay? The vast majority of homeless people are men.
This is something that both him and City Crusher do, and it's really annoying because... Like, I understand that we're trying to approach this topic, but specifically from the male perspective, like how homeless men are dealing with the system. And it's true that there are some differences between how men experience homelessness and how women experience it. But most of the problems that you can describe for men, pretty much all of them, are problems that women are also going to endure if they're on the street. My argument is that women are actually going to deal with other problems, in addition to all the problems that they and men also share. But this is where we're also getting into like more of a broader leftist critique, because all I'm really doing in that video is trying to explain the disparity. Why are there more homeless men than homeless women? My argument is that women are statistically, like if you put a man in the streets and a woman in the streets, statistically speaking, they have the same starting point in that situation, the woman is going to end up worse. The reason she's going to end up worse is because, among many other things, while she's also at risk of freezing to death, she's additionally at risk of being sexually assaulted many more times than the man. If a woman is pregnant while she's homeless, that adds a ton of potential health issues, health hazards, that a man in that situation would not have to deal with. But that doesn't imply that I am in favor of the system as it is. If you ask me, should there be enough homeless beds for both men and women so that no one is ever homeless? Like, yeah, no shit. Of course I would endorse that. Of course I would be in favor of that. But I would take it even further. As a leftist, I don't think homeless people should exist at all. Rather, I don't think homelessness should exist. That means you tax the crap out of the rich so that we have strong social safety nets, so that we have affordable housing, that we have universal housing even. So that no matter who you are, no matter what situation you're in, you never have to sleep in the street. That would be for both men and women. That's my position on homelessness, my real position. The analysis I bring up here, the reason I say, like, I don't understand why they're talking specifically about men and, just trying to make it about men and women, is because no matter what solution they have, if they have any, to solve the problem of homeless men, there's no reason that it's not a situation that can't also be applied to women. That's why I make it about homeless people And they insist on making it about homeless men, because for them, it's largely performative. They just want to complain about men's issues. And even if there's a disparity here, which I'm more than willing to acknowledge, my criticisms, my analysis, and my solutions go a lot further than these guys ever let on. Why do these people want men to be the ones to suffer the most? That's because otherwise they don't have a point. Because otherwise they don't have an argument. Like, I've had some people in the comments of that video talking about, like, what's your data to suggest that a woman inside a shelter is worse off than a man in the street? That's not my argument. My argument is that if they are both in the street, the woman is worse off. Statistically, in terms of probabilities, she is worse off. Bad the situation is. It's a big problem in society today that we tend to dehumanize homeless people as
homeless men.
The only way we can really again, what am I saying here that isn't both applicable to men and applicable to women? Every time you try and make it about homeless men, it's like you're trying to make the argument that it's not happening to homeless women. I think I'm saying hopeless instead of homeless. You know what I mean, forgive me. Even if there's a disparity, the experience is the same, more or less. So when I'm starting to list here all the problems that happen with homelessness, and people then tell me, why are you ignoring all the problems that men are going through? It's because they're not listening to anything I'm saying. They think that because I'm saying homeless people, I'm not talking about men. I am. When I say homeless people, it includes men too. It's just that my language is too inclusive for their liking.
By the way, he will actually dehumanize homeless men because he's going to, in a non sequitur manner, bring up homeless women and how they are having it actually worse, even though they are the minority of homeless people. And as we shall see, they also have better access to shelters and all kinds of things, right?
Yes. Enjoy your lives and comforts, knowing that some people live in the street and barely survive at all, is by...
Most rough sleepers are also men, by the way.
Convincing ourselves that their situation is solely the result of poor decision-making. This is a logic that allows us...
No, it was the evil patriarchy, remember? Everything is patriarchy.
Okay, again, so confrontational that, like, my points are actually flying over his head. What I'm talking about right now is the cultural attitudes towards homeless people. The reason homeless people end up getting stuck in the street, whether they are men or women, is because a lot of people justify them being there by saying they deserve it, by saying that they do poor decisions. I'm not even talking about the patriarchy right now. This is a leftist critique. There's a lot of things that go at play in homelessness, but primary among them is wealth inequality. You can't talk about wealth inequality because you're trying to make it about men specifically, so you're trying to make it about misandry, you're trying to make it about feminism. That's not what I'm making it out to be. I'm talking specifically here about wealth inequality and how it's leading to homelessness, and how in our culture we are dehumanizing homeless people, both men and women, and putting the blame on them so we don't have to feel bad about the fact that they're out there freezing and starving in the streets while we get to be home and then enjoy our luxuries. There's nothing wrong or incorrect about what I'm saying. He's just being contrarian because he thinks I'm a man-hater. To ignore the very real fact that our system is rigged in a way that will screw people over and...
Oh yeah, and what kind of system do we live in?
Capitalism. Liberalism. I even say it in the video.
Oh yeah, a system that is very feminist actually. But we'll get to that.
Keep them at the bottom to keep others at the top. And by ignoring that, we don't have to change anything about society or ourselves. But as Spetsnaz points out, the very state of homelessness, regardless of how one achieves it, can make a problem significantly worse than it already was. Between the strain on mental health that comes with the uncertainty of homelessness, the unreliable source of shelter and food, the violence, the drugs, the countless arrests and abuse...
Yeah, not having access to shelters. I wonder what this has to do with, I don't know, domestic violence against men and the lack of male domestic violence shelters, and what could the result, what could be the reason behind that? Could it be feminism maybe? And like how feminists have for years campaigned against the idea that men and women have roughly similar domestic violence victimization rates?
Okay, again, this is where I'm talking about wealth inequality here. The problem in the first place is that homeless people exist. That's where my real criticism goes. When I make prescriptions for how to solve homelessness, I'm not making prescriptions for women. And I'm not saying men should stay in the street. You are implying that, because every time you make your arguments about homelessness, you try and make it about men and you leave women out of it completely. Everything I listed there, like all the issues, the risks that homeless people go through, homeless men, those are all things that women go through, and then some. That's the argument I make, and, he can't comprehend this.
Could it have something to do with that, maybe?
An individual's mental health can deteriorate very quickly when they're homeless. The risk to physical health, from dehydration to malnutrition, can make everything worse. So I do think raising awareness of homelessness from this angle is crucial. But in the case of Spetsnaz's video, I just find myself asking, why is the focus solely on men here?
Yeah, because they're the vast majority of homeless people, okay? And also because they face unique
Okay, well, I just went over all of this. The unique problem that men are facing is that they are being less prioritized in a system that can't help everybody. It's kind of like triage, medical triage, trying to figure out who needs healthcare the most, and then starting from there, and those who can afford to wait a little longer, like they're put away. It's kind of the same principle, with the difference being that there's just no resources to take care of everybody at all times. So then they go on statistics, they decide, okay, well, who is more likely to suffer in the streets, this man or this woman? Well, based on the stats we have, if we can only help one person, we might want to help the person that's the least likely to face danger. That doesn't mean the man isn't likely to face hardships, because, of course, he's homeless. Exactly, Gottlieb. Like, they say that men are the most homeless people, but then they say they deserve it for poor decision making. This is what I would like to get into here. This is what I would like to hear from A Shield for Men, this guy. What do you think causes homelessness? And do you have any political prescriptions, any ideas for how to solve homelessness? And if you do these only apply to men, or do they apply to everyone equally?
Victims in this and that context. Then they solely focus on women or mention men as a footnote, maybe.
Now, yes, men make up the bulk of homeless people.
Oh, there you go. There's your explanation.
Okay, but they do that a lot. Like, City Crusher did the same thing. It's not just about looking at the data, it's about trying to understand the data. I'm just going to give a quick example here of what I'm talking about. You can't just look at a stat that says 70% are men, 30% are women. Men seem overrepresented in homelessness. That is true. Now, why is that? There is a way to interpret this data. There's a correct way to interpret it, and then there's an incorrect way to interpret it. His interpretation is, well, society hates men, so they're just giving priority to women, and men are left to the curb to suffer and die. That's a poor data analysis. One of the best examples of poor data comprehension that I've seen in the past decade is the 1350 argument. The 1350 statistic is a widely circulated but often misleading and decontextualized claim used to suggest a link between race and crime rates. It falsely claims that African Americans, who make up approximately 13% of the population, commit over 50% of all violent crimes and homicide. Now, they say that the stat here isn't strictly correct, that it's misleading, but again, the reason it's so misunderstood is because people then go like, okay, well, if Black people make 13% of the population but commit half of all violent crimes, doesn't that mean that Black people are really, really violent? It's like, no, there's other things you need to bring into the context. You know what Black people also suffer from predominantly? Poverty. And poverty in Black communities is something that you can easily trace back decades, centuries, to see where it's coming from. And what you'll also see, and this is true in every circumstances, one of the biggest factors that lead to crime is poverty. Poor people are more likely to break the law to make ends meet. So if Black people are predominantly poor in the United States, then that also means they're more likely to commit crimes. That's not because they're inherently violent. It's because they have a unique economic systemic failure that they're dealing with. This is where systemic racism comes into play. But anyway, I just want to make sure that this is really clear, because this is purposefully oversimplifying the data to make his point. But that doesn't mean that homelessness is predominantly a male problem.
Oh, yes, it is, actually, if we define it as who makes up the majority of homeless people.
And again, that's oversimplified. Nor is it an indicator of systemic discrimination against men.
Oh, yes, it is, actually.
No, it's not.
Homeless community.
Okay, you see?
From
Okay, well, I do like actually that he cites Invisible People, because they are a website that really talk about, they have a YouTube channel and they really humanize homeless people by talking to them and getting to know them. Very good channel. Everyone should look at them. He's talking here about how they're overrepresented and underserved. Again, that's because of all the problems I just cited. It is a fact that men make up the bulk of homeless people, but that's not the full story.
Invisible people, men are overrepresented and underserved within why men are the majority of homeless people. Homeless men are far less likely to qualify for emergency shelter when compared to their female counterparts. Single fathers with children bear the burden of finding a shelter that accepts single men and their offspring. Finding a suitable shelter is so rare that many are forced to remain on the street, in hotels, vehicles, or cycling in and out from some combination of the above. Disparities also exist for male victims of domestic violence, many of whom flee from their violent, intimate partners only to learn that the local community resources are for women alone.
Okay, So a solution would be more housing, more assisted housing, subsidized housing, more investing. The reason they make it for women only is often because they have limited capacity, so they go by who is statistically more likely to be dealing with these issues. It's the same thing. Like, you can talk about like abuse in relationships being unreported, and that's true. But what I would suggest is that if housing was at least in part decommodified, if there was a lot of affordable housing accessible, what you would find is that a lot of people would be breaking up, because there are a lot of people, both men and women, who stay in abusive relationships precisely because they have nowhere to go. Women might have slightly more options in that case, and I agree that that sucks for men, but ideally you just want both of them to have the same resources. This is not something I'm denying, but I am offering constructive solutions that this guy is not offering, because he's not focused on making the world better. He's just trying to focus on how men are suffering more, because that's his whole existence.
This is clearly an indication that men are discriminated against in society. And this lack of male domestic violence shelters, women, and feminist women in particular, have something to do with that, actually. So here's the case of Erin Pisey. She opened up the first male domestic violence shelter, and guess what happened? Militant feminists have threatened her and wanted to basically shut her down, and she had to flee the country, basically. Right? This is just one example. I have other videos where I show that feminists lie about domestic violence, and they have even falsified research and all of that nonsense. Okay, I'm
sure this happens, and I agree that sucks. If it actually happens, and that's something that really happened, and there are feminists out there who say that's bad, or they're fighting against it because they're just being bitter or whatever, yeah, I agree, it's dumb, it's cringe. The problem, again, is that they are desperate to line up all of the feminists together to make the same hate group by only defining the worst elements of whoever called themselves feminism. But I just explained it earlier, like, if there were feminists 100 years ago that were eugenics, I wouldn't associate with them. If there's a woman just doing a homeless shelter for men, and then for whatever reason a group of feminists decide that they need to attack that shelter because how dare they give men any help, yeah, that's bad. But I don't feel like I have to defend this, because I don't associate with it. In fact, a shield for men, like we just established earlier, you are a men's rights activist, that means you are part of the Manosphere. There's no way around it. You can say that you're not, you are. The men's rights activists, the incels, they're part of the same broader movement of the Manosphere. That's just how it is. So, cry about it. If every time you started talking, started bringing up points, I started saying, you guys radicalized Elliot Rodger into killing all these people. You guys radicalized all these incels into doing all these shootings and all these other attacks and murders. You'll probably look at me and be like, I assume, you'll probably be like, okay, I don't support any of that. I think that's bad. I think incels are cringe. I'm not an incel myself. I don't think people should be incels. And I'd be like, great, that's fantastic. I'm glad we agree on that. So can you stop all these association fallacies that you're trying to make constantly? Like, I get you don't like feminists. I get you think they're all a hate movement, but there are genuine policies driven by different schools of feminism, by different activist groups of feminists that don't support any of this stuff. The mere fact that I consider myself a feminist, that I don't side with you in the Manosphere or most of the things that you guys believe, but I can still, believe in women's equality, I can still believe in the patriarchy, and I can still see something like this and think that's wrong. You need to be able to reconcile my positions with the things that you think about feminists. That's just something that we have to agree on, because otherwise, every single time you're going to make an association like that, I'm just going to associate you with Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate trafficked women. That means you are in favor of trafficking women. You are in favor of women being subservient to men, because some men in the Manosphere actually think that. Deal with it. That's part of your movement. Deal with it. And some. For example, homeless women are far more likely to experience violence in the streets, such as sexual assault.
Yeah, maybe. The problem with that is men tend to underreport, and...
Okay, so if they underreport, is the implication there that they experience it at the exact same rate? Because there's lots of data on that. There is a lot of data on that. And women underreport too. Let's be clear. Women underreport their sexual assaults as well.
Are less recognized when they experience such sexual assault. So
yeah, that's also a problem that men not being taken seriously when they're assaulted is also a result of expecting men to be stronger than that. If a man says he was assaulted, especially by a woman, lots of men will think they're pussies. Lots of men will think they're weak. And that's one of the things that will discourage a lot of men from reporting their own assaults. And all of that comes back to toxic masculinity, which comes back to the patriarchy. Look at how we went full circle. I at least have like a full explanation from where it starts and where it leads, or where it ended and where it comes from. He doesn't. He can't. His only explanation is like stupidly narrow-minded. It's just like, well, society hates men and women are in power and that's it. And it's like, the data just never supports it.
I don't really trust that data, actually.
They're also far more likely to have a child with them. The data very... Okay, you say you don't trust it, but that's your purview. What if I just don't trust you? Is that sufficient evidence for me to disregard this entire video?
They might be far more likely to have a child with them, but why does this constitute evidence of them having it worse in general?
You want to think about that for more than a few seconds? I mean, I already explained it because, like, in my mind, I already kind of knew where you were going. I remember some of your arguments, so I already explained it. But seriously, which is harder, Shield for Men? Being homeless by yourself? Being homeless and having someone to take care of that's incapable of taking care of themselves? Which is going to have an easier situation? Country to country, of course. Being Canadian myself, I'm looking at data from Canada, but you will find similar patterns in other countries. So, reading from the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights, 90% of families using emergency shelters are headed by single women.
Yes, and men don't have access to those shelters.
Now, I agree, but just look back to what I just said. It's like you're complaining here that homeless shelters are prioritizing children over men. Like, you can say what you want about male disposability when it comes to sacrificing themselves for women, but I think we can agree that in a situation where you have a man, you have a woman, and you have a child, and you can only save one of them, you might just save the child. A mother would sacrifice herself for her kid, just like a father would sacrifice themselves for their kid. Further down it reads, the same survey shows that 37% of young women and 41% of trans and non-binary people who are homeless will experience sexual assault, compared to just 8% of men.
Again, I don't trust this data because this is probably feminist research, that's number one. Number two, men tend to underreport.
Okay, so by that metric, we can now ignore every single source you have. If all it takes for me to disregard any of your sources is to just not trust them, then that's it. Like, you want to have like an honest intellectual conversation, you need to be able to address all of these things in good faith. Why should I trust anything you have to say now, if you're not going to give me or my sources the same benefit of the doubt without checking them? For the record, like, I appreciate that you put all your sources in the description, so are mine. Mine are in the description as well. If you want to take them one by one and deconstruct them, like, knock yourself out. But if you're just going to be like, nah, I don't trust them, okay, don't trust them. This is the level of intellectual integrity that we're working on now. So on average, 9 out of 10 homeless people with children are women, and at least 1 homeless woman out of 3 will be sexually assaulted.
Again, the sexual assault rate's questionable. I don't see how...
Listen, I am more than willing to concede on your point that men underrepresent. This is the difference between you and me. I can concede on some things. I can agree with you that a lot of men will probably not report their own assaults. Totally fair. But you have to apply the same benefit to women.
Yeah, it is wealth inequality. I don't disagree with that.
Oh, he's actually talking about the causes of homelessness. Descriptive solution offered, being that society needs to focus more on men and boys, he can't even address the root of the homeless problem, which, to be clear, is not that we don't care about men and we're sending them to the street. The real problem is...
Oh yes, that is. This is exactly the problem.
It's wealth inequality. The increased...
Yeah, it is wealth inequality. I don't disagree with that. But it is also feminism. So to short you on that point, next aspect of this video.
Okay, so you agree it's wealth inequality, but you need to understand, and I'm just going to reiterate this point one last time. If you solve wealth inequality, you're going to end homelessness for everybody. If you want to blame feminism and keep blaming feminism, I mean, you do you, man. I know that you are completely red pill brained on this issue. Fine, whatever. If you tax the rich, if you reinvest in social safety nets, if you make housing affordable, you can end homelessness for everybody, men and women. Are we on board with this? Can we agree on this? Because if we agree on this, then for me, there's nothing else to talk about. I don't care to debate with you the minutiae of how it happens, because clearly we'll never agree with each other, because if I bring a source that contradicts you, you're just going to say you don't trust it, and then that's it. There's nowhere to go here. But if we can agree, we can reinvest in society with left-wing policies of, universal healthcare, universal education, affordable housing, better transportation, better access to mental health care. I'm not talking with you about whether those things are feasible, because I know people will debate about those things too, but to me that's what really matters. Let's solve homelessness, period. I am a feminist, but I don't want men to be homeless in the streets. I don't hate men that I want them on the streets. I just want people to not be homeless. Can we agree on that? Is that fair? Anyway, let's get to this.
Disposable male part here. He says that these wars, the Korean War, Vietnam War, Persian Gulf War, Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, you can see that the vast majority of victims, U.S. military victims, are male. When you actually look into these kinds of things, the vast majority of civilian deaths are also male when it comes to war, okay? And he's saying stuff like this.
But looking back at all of those wars, were women even allowed to join the military?
Yes, in those wars, women were allowed to join the military. Women could serve as permanent regular members of the U.S. military after the Women Armed Services Integration Act of 1948 was signed into law.
Okay, I'm specifically talking about combat roles, though. If you have people dying in wars, it's because they're in combat. They're on the front line. Women were allowed for quite a while to join in many different capacities. If you're a nurse in the field hospital, you're not typically close to the front line, you know what I mean? So if this was allowed, if they were able to join in logistical capacities and stuff like that, yeah, that's great too. But when we're talking about casualties, we're typically talking of people on the front line fighting and putting their lives on the line and often losing them. This is before 1948? Wait. Oh, before 1948. Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, so I guess the question is, like, hey, maybe I'm completely wrong. Let's look into it. Women could officially join combat roles in the U.S. military starting in March 2016, when the Pentagon opened all combat jobs to them. This followed the 2013 decision to lift the ban on women serving in ground combat units below the brigade level and was fully implemented in 2016. This is actually, I think, like one of the screenshots I took from my video. They could officially join in combat role. Maybe there was exceptions before that. Maybe there was like things they could do. But over 200 years of service, the history of women in the military. Like, at least legally speaking, like every single role that is open to men was not open to women in the US military until 9 years ago. So I'm sure there were women in combat roles before that. You can find some exceptions. Maybe the law wasn't always clear and it allowed for women to join. But my point still stands here. And all of these wars were before 2016, just so we're clear.
So, but he wants to say, oh, patriarchy though, right? That's the explanation for everything.
Well, again, what do you say about like the historical cultural norms that men need to be the ones going in wars and women need to stay at home and take care of the kids? Because this is what defines this. This is what defines the draft. This is exactly it.
Couldn't just be that men try to protect women from the horrors of war and just want to sacrifice other men. And
yes, thank you. And where do they get that notion from? How did that happen? Is this biological? No, it's not. You are making the point for me, dude. Wake up.
Women are actually okay with that, largely speaking. I mean, I have done a video
yes,
showing...
because they're also part of the same thing, you know? Like, women are taught that they're also supposed to stay home, and they will often see being expected to fill roles traditionally run by men with resistance, because they're like, that's not what I was brought up to do. That's how it's affecting women as well, anyway.
Some female academic, I think a military historian, and she basically tried to justify the male-only draft in Germany that is currently a thing in Germany.
Okay, and I'll say the same thing I've just said about the draft like multiple times. If your problem with the draft is that it only drafts men, end it. I'm all for ending the draft. So as far as I'm concerned, that's all there is to it.
I should also do a video on not just the standard nonsense that feminists have put forward that have that men didn't set up this.
Oh yeah, he cites himself here. You see? A Shield for Men, MRA, Substack. Yeah, he's on there. He's got his own things. Like, that guy is really invested. I'll give him props for that. But, you know, like, I wouldn't just cite myself. If you cite other people in that article, I would suggest you cite those instead. But that comes off like very, what's your source? My source is trust me, bro. Which, you're not trusting me, so why do I trust you?
Quote unquote patriarchy, but women set up traditional...
At some point he goes into hypergamy as well. I really don't care. That's not part of any of my arguments. He brings up the White Feather campaign again. Oh, I think we get into circumcision. But I will say, he comes off as a more concrete example of MGTOW men being weird and somewhat unhinged.
Oh yeah, weird and somewhat unhinged. Why are these terms always brought up whenever a man rightfully complains about circumcision?
Okay, so At this point, I would rather read the comments to see like what we actually argued about. But the main gist of it is that in the video, I literally say unambiguously that I don't think circumcision should be done unless it's a medical necessity. That's my position right there. Like, when I'm talking about being weird and unhinged and insane and dumb, is specifically Barbarossa's explanation for why men are being circumcised. And we went over it the last time, and this guy is misunderstanding it the same way that City Crusher was. Says the man who calls you smug in the beginning. Yeah, he calls me smug one time, and then it's like, enjoy the smugness for the rest of the video, man. Holy crap.
I wonder if this has anything to do with bias.
Maybe it has something to do with your bias, man, because I give you unambiguously my position in this video, and you seem completely unable to discuss it. It's like you keep trying to make my argument be the argument that other people I don't know about are making. I literally said in the video, and then I told you, and you still didn't want to listen, you said I was making excuses, lame excuses, that's what you said. I don't believe that circumcision should happen unless it's medically necessary. Now, if you want to argue the medical necessity, I don't care. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of things that could be treated without circumcising. That's true, then I'm in favor of doing those things instead of doing circumcision, because that's my position. It's self-explanatory. So there's a lot of debate around circumcision, right? Like, should it be allowed? Should it even...
It shouldn't be allowed.
Even be normalized? I'm just explaining what the topic around circumcision is. Like, I know you're eager to give your answer, but that's not what I'm talking about. And
no, it shouldn't.
broadly speaking, I tend to side with Bar here. I don't think circumcision should be done unless it's medically necessary.
It's pretty much never medically necessary.
Okay, you want to make that argument, that's fine, but don't say that I didn't say that line. I just told you my position. And I am getting a little passionate right now because I've seen the way he talks about it in the comments, and it's like, it is unbelievable to me, like how this is so hard to grasp.
And even if there were some supposed health benefits, there are no health benefits. But even if there are alternative treatments.
Yeah, and I said it shouldn't be done unless it's necessary. One of the things I brought up in my response to City Crusher is that the main driving reason people get circumcised today as infants, it's because the doctor is strongly recommending it to the parents because they believe, you know, that like there's potential issues that you could get later on if you keep the foreskin, and you may avoid these, and there may be some other benefits by, you know, cutting it off. And I literally say, unless it's necessary. Doing it as a medical prevention, I don't agree with. I think if you're not going to do it, then you should inform yourself on what the risks are, and you should know what you're getting into. Most people are going to be fine, like, don't get me wrong, it's just that there are still some unique issues that you're going to have to potentially deal with, even if it's rare. You just have to know about it, you just have to be informed. That's my position. And a good chunk of circumcisions come from religion, like Judaism and Islam.
That is a common excuse that people make that want to take away the gendered aspect of this.
I mean, it's religion. It is religion, right? Whether it's woman in religion or men in religion, it's religion. So I'm talking about it specifically from religion. Because if there's a woman who's an atheist, and she's not in favor of circumcision, and the woman who is religious is in favor of circumcision, the reason for the two of them, why they're for and why they're against, the driving factor is religion. So I don't really care.
Right, they just want to blame religion. Meanwhile, there are also a lot of atheists who do this.
Yes, as medical prevention. Whether that's something you disagree with, like, I understand it.
Okay, so it's actually more universal. But yeah.
Infants who cannot consent. I don't think those are moral, especially if they are done on children and infants who cannot consent. Okay, take the win. We agree with each other, right? I just said that. We shouldn't do it on children and infants who cannot consent. That's my position. Can you take the win, please? Can you celebrate that we agree on this premise?
Religious circumcision? And what?
Or do you just need to be like so contrarian because I'm a feminist, so I'm your sworn enemy? Like, calm down.
There's also a reason behind atheist circumcision. I think the issue goes a little bit deeper here, because those kinds of things don't come out of nowhere.
Religious tradition, medical necessity, or medical prevention. Barbarossa, however, has a very interesting take.
When we circumcise young boys or infants...
Okay, so this is the take of Barbarossa, where he says that the reason, predominantly, that circumcision is done is because women prefer circumcised penises. Therefore, the parents, they have their newborn baby, and they're like, hold on, he's got a foreskin though. What about the woman he has sex with in 20 years? They're going to prefer a circumcised penis. So should we just cut it off as a favor to her? That's what he's saying here.
Assume that boys will consent to... doing to them. We are surgically mutilating their genitals, and we are assuming that one day, perhaps 14 or 15 years into the future, they will be appreciative of the fact that their parents did so when the boy starts taking an interest in women sexually. That's why we really do it. It's for female aesthetic preference. So we assume that boys will consent to it because in the future, 15, 20 years down the road, both, I guess,
Okay, so this is what I'm saying. Like, I'm not making this up, right? Circumcision is actually a form of male oppression because
It is, actually.
it's being primarily done to be aesthetically pleasing to women. Any sources?
Okay, I mean, City Crusher already showed one source for that.
His City Crusher's source was men or boys or children, I guess, being circumcised in the Victorian era 200 years ago as a way to prevent them from masturbating. That was his source, for one. The other source was just keep showing data that says that women prefer circumcised penises, to which I'm going to say the same thing. Just because women prefer circumcised penises doesn't mean that that's the leading factor for why children, babies, are being circumcised. It has nothing to do with one another.
I also have some sources that women definitely are contributing to circumcision, whether or not...
Yes, because they're being told by doctors, if you don't do that, they might get infections, they might get this, they might get that. So they're like, oh no, well, I don't want my kid to have that, so I'm just going to have them circumcised.
It's for aesthetic reasons or for any other reason.
Yes, a mother looks at her infant son and she's thinking, well, I like circumcised dick better. I'm gonna make sure he makes the woman he fucks happy. That's totally the reasoning here.
But they do seem to prefer it, or a lot of women seem to prefer it, okay? And they are one of the causes behind it, definitely.
Okay, so I'm guessing here, like, there's a surprisingly large amount of women who are doctors who do these procedures. Yeah, so if they are female doctors, they see babies and they're like, I'm going to get to slip him because I'm an evil woman feminist and I want to oppress men.
Practice, it's men imposes upon other men. Meanwhile, on Reddit, there were subreddits like Circ Moms too.
Oh, Reddit, great source, for sure.
Is a lot of interesting information. For example, parents' reasons for choosing male child genital cutting vary greatly.
Hey, it varies greatly. So you're telling me there's multiple reasons? That it's not the main reason? I'll take this clip so out of context. I'm sure you will. Godspeed to you.
Some studies have concluded that the dominant deciding factor is the mother's preference or the father's penile status. So the mother's preference, dominant factor.
Hygiene is a commonly stated reason. Some parents believe that circumcision is an eventuality, so they might as well do it in infancy to prevent him from remembering the pain. Health concerns in general are also reasons parents give, even though such claims have been refuted. This is that too. This is the one thing, like, because I had to freshen up a bit on the circumcision this morning while I was arguing with the guy. But like, yeah, a lot of the things that people talk about in terms of like potential issues that baby boys can have as a result of keeping the foreskin, they're actually pretty rare. If you stay hygienic, if you clean everything properly, like, you'll never have most of the problems that are associated. There is one problem that is commonly associated, and that's a problem that you can only have if you're not circumcised, and it's, I already forgot the term. Maybe you know the term, telling me? It's when the foreskin completely sews shut. But even that, apparently, as I was reading into it, even that, it's possible to cure it without just cutting it off. So my friend from 20 years ago, maybe back then, it's the main solution he had when he was circumcised because he had that issue. But it is possible, potentially, with other methods that don't require any cutting, to actually get it to open back up again, which it's fantastic if that's true. Then we should totally do that instead of just circumcising. I agree. If you really want to make an argument about circumcision and why it's bad and why it's so prevalent in society, I think it's because it just has like a really strong cultural element to it. And it's also something that is immensely outdated. This is the main problem with circumcision by itself. It's extremely outdated. I mean, we're talking about I heard of circumcision for the first time. It was the Jewish people doing it in the Ancient Testament, thousands of years ago. This was becoming a thing, at least. And people just associate it with religion, they just associate it with a bunch of things. And it is true that even in medicine, there are often things, notions, that we believe about, our health or sexuality, that then, like a couple of years later, a couple of decades later, new data, new research is done, and then we realize that it's completely unnecessary anymore. I was watching the other day the Dr. Mike video on Jubilee where he debated a bunch of anti-vaxxers, and he brought up an example of a doctor like 30 years older than him who knew a procedure to diagnose their patients with a specific illness that doesn't exist anymore. That means that Dr. Mike, he knows that's a disease that used to exist, But if he had to diagnose it, he's not even equipped for how to do it because when you went to school, it was already considered outdated. I think it's the same thing with circumcision. If we understand that circumcision is outdated and that whatever problems that can arise from keeping the foreskin is either rare or that there's very simple ways of like preventing it, then I think that's where society should head towards. Like, I'm totally in favor of that. But for some reason, like just because I called this one specific example completely stupid, this idea that parents are doing it for the aesthetic preference of their son's future sexual partners, that is completely stupid, that is completely unhinged. I double down on this because it's not substantiated by any data whatsoever. He doesn't have any data. This paper right here doesn't say anything about that.
Sure. Only deciding factor, okay? Okay, yeah, but women have nothing to do with this, right? Women have nothing to do with this. What about this paper? Women's preferences for penile circumcision and sexual partners?
Again, just because that's what they prefer doesn't mean that's the reason they're doing it. Those are different. Those are not the same thing. Oh yeah, this is something that we should keep in mind also. Like, he's acknowledging here that while he is using this source, the survey only had 145 new mothers, and he's like, yeah, it's not a large sample, but still.
This is some evidence, at least. And I think the
Oh, this is some evidence. You know, it's not much, but it still counts for something. Speedrunning this now.
male genital mutilation, aka circumcision. I did a video on this, how feminists enable baby torture.
He made a video on this that's being shared on the subreddit Save Boys from Knife Rape. 212 followers? How niche is this? Honestly, this is such a weird claim to make.
No, it isn't actually.
How far do you have to dig to pretend like this is a real men's issue?
Oh, circumcision is not a real man's issue, guy.
No, again, this is what you guys don't understand. I literally just said, you idiot. I just said what is unhinged is Barbarossa's claim. I'm saying, like, how far do you have to go to say this is a real men's issue? The point is that you have to go so far as to claim that women are doing it on purpose, or women or men or whatever, that they're doing it purposefully to infants, specifically so they would be more aesthetically pleasing to other women in the future. That's what I'm saying is not a real problem. Circumcision is a problem, sure, whatever. But I'm being pretty clear here. That's why I'm saying it's dumb. You say I have a snarky tone in the video or whatever. Like, sure, I'm being snarky because I think it's stupid. I don't have any respect for this claim because it's not substantiated anywhere. It's stupid. Oh, there's this one thing here. This is when I made my own survey. I'm not gonna go over the entire thing. He is completely right here. A shield for men in talking about how because this thing was done privately and I didn't actually link it, like, there's no way for him to verify this claim. That's totally fair. The reason I let myself make a survey like that and not cite it at all is because I'm responding to Barbarossa, who did not cite anything. I was totally fine doing my own survey because I was curious, and I decided to just share it for fun. No shield for men, if you want. I could find the post again and I could link it to you directly if you want it. It is true, I did not make it up, even if clearly, like, when it comes to citing sources, like, I completely agree, like, that, you know, like, there's no effort actually put into this. I was just doing it for fun. But again, what it does show is that, you know, the woman, at least the woman in my group, and it was a tiny sample, I know, but there were also women who were very sexually liberal. They were very sex-positive feminists, and that was their answers. So this was the main thing. I don't even remember, like, what the rest was about. Oh yeah, that was about false allegations. And again, this is why I want to highlight that he needs to keep into account the context in which I'm responding to this article is because Aidan Paladin used that study. So he can tell me that study is stupid. He can tell me whatever he wants with that study. I don't really care. What I was talking about specifically was how Aidan Paladin was misinterpreting it. One of her main claims was, well, in that study, they just asked a bunch of people how they feel about the cases to see if they thought it was a sexual assault. And that's not true. The 4 people involved, they're academic researchers, they're highly qualified for one, so it couldn't just be anyone, as Aidan Paladin claimed. She says that, like, you know, they didn't actually ask the opinions of police or whatever, and they did. It's like, all the claims she made about this study were just, like, flat out wrong. It was super easy to dismantle. So that's the extent to which I use the study. The study itself shows between 2 and 10%. Those are, like, all the other studies that they accumulated within that study to talk about the topic of false allegations. And what they talked about is between 2 and 10% of allegations are false. They themselves in their own study came to 5.9%. That's it.
If only 6% are deemed false, that automatically means that the rest, 94%, are automatically true by default.
Yeah, I'll give you that one. That was not something that was smart of me to say. It's dumb. Yeah, just because 6% are deemed false doesn't mean that the other 94% are. It just means that they haven't been proven to be false or true. Most of them anyway. So that means that there's definitely a lot of margin here for error. Like, fine, I'll concede that point.
Think about the entailments here. That means that anyone can just make up baseless claims, right? And they have to be automatically...
Yeah, this is the other thing too. Like, if you look into it, they make a distinction between claims that are deemed false and claims that are deemed baseless. Baseless means that they just simply did not find any evidence that it either happened or that the person is making it up. When it's deemed false, is that they have concrete evidence that it was fabricated, and when it's true, it's that they have proof to put the guy in jail. The problem with sexual assaults, as we should understand, is pretty common sense. Like, they're extremely difficult to prove. If you're living with your spouse, and then your spouse assaults you, how do you prove that? The only way you could do it, maybe for a woman, is if you immediately go to the hospital, immediately call the police, immediately get a rape kit. But a lot of people who are victims of sexual assault, they often feel shamed, they're often intimidated into silence, and that means that by the time they find the courage to talk about it, all the evidence is gone, or it's been too far for them to do anything about it or to bring any evidence to the contrary. So maybe Aidan should have read the entire study. It would have saved her some time.
Maybe you should have actually read the study and actually understood it.
I did. You're the one who's not understanding it straight up. I will debate you on this.
Let's just do that, right? So here's the study, Lisak et al., false allegations of sexual assault at an analysis of 10 years of reported cases.
The one thing I will say about the study, apart from him, that I agree that, like, considering you only have 136 cases, it's a relatively small sample size. The other thing we have to take into account with that study is it's specifically looking at false allegations on campus. So you're talking about a very specific demographic, young adults in college, lots of parties. So it's possible that in that context, there's a dynamic here between the people making the assaults and the people making the allegations and people making the false allegations. There can be a series of patterns here that's going to be very specific to the context of this study. But it just means you take that into account when you look at it. And then you look at other studies, and then you see how the other studies do it, and then from all of them together, you kind of just take a more educated guess. If you don't want to look at this study, which came to 6%, there's lots of different studies that make it between 2 and 10. That's also completely fine.
All cases n equals 136 of sexual assault reported to a major Northeastern university over a 10-year period are analyzed to determine the percentage of false allegations. Of the 136 cases of sexual assault reported over 10 years period, 8, meaning 6%, are coded as false allegations. Now, anyone who already has some knowledge about anything notices exactly a couple of issues already in the abstract. So n equals 136. Again, is that enough statistical power?
Okay, well, the problem with that is that while it is a fair argument, you are picking and choosing when to apply it. You're applying it to that study because you don't like it. But if we go further, because I remember you doing this shit, there is a part where he talks about how, they asked police officers how they felt about whether the accusations that they're investigating are false, and the numbers were from as low as like 5% to as high as 90%. And his reaction to that was like, well, I know it's a small sample, but still, I find that number very interesting. Okay, but if it's a small sample, you should just dismiss it out of hand. Especially considering that you're just asking police officers who may not necessarily have the training, who may not classify it, or just doing completely random educated guess. Like, you know this just as well. But you would cite this just because it agrees with you.
Reported cases do not move forward for a variety of reasons, such as a lack of evidence. A lack of evidence. Oh, so that means they were unsubstantiated.
Okay, so this is again like something like, listen, he's more than comfortable calling me disgusting. I'm more than comfortable calling him disgusting here. Because what he's saying is basically, well, if there's no evidence, then it's just as likely that they would lie than they would actually be truthful. You know the sentence, believe all women? It doesn't mean that, like, if there's evidence that they say it didn't happen, that you should still believe them, obviously. But what it does mean is that because so many actual reported cases of sexual assault never lead to a conviction, maybe we should try to more proactively investigate by starting from the premise that the allegation is true and then seeing what happens. Ultimately, if there's no evidence that they either made it up or that there's any truth to it, it's just going to be classified as baseless, and that's going to end it. If there's evidence that it was fabricated, then they go in that direction. But the likelihood that just because it's baseless, that means they're lying, that's only a reasoning you would have if you just want to take every opportunity to shit on women, like people who are in the Manosphere. So of course he is. But just because there's no evidence doesn't mean that they're just lying. I can take that reasoning in the exact opposite direction, and more often than not, I'm the one who's going to be correct, not him.
But we should just assume that they are true, regardless.
If only to investigate it to find out.
By the way, this RAIN organization, I will do a future video on this organization because it's a feminist go-to source. It says right here, the majority of rape victims in the US are female. 82% of underage rape victims and 90%.
And then at the bottom it says men and boys also experience sexual violence. Funny how they try and include that as well. But it's nice how they actually bring that up. Like the second thing they bring up, literally after their first stat, which he just cited, is that they're also trying to include men here. You would think he appreciates that, but no, like, because they say that first, that's why he's mad.
And let's look at these definitions. Forcible rape, forcible sodomy, sexual assault with an object, forcible fondling. Do you see what is missing here? Made to penetrate.
Made to penetrate. Isn't that just rape? I understand that maybe like you want like something that's a little more inclusive. Forcible fondling would mean like you're touching them without their consent. Sexual assault with an object would mean that maybe a knife is involved, or maybe an object used to insert somewhere by force. Forcible sodomy would mean specifically in the butt. But forcible rape means specifically penis and vagina. So I would assume that if a woman rapes a man, forcibly inserting him into her, that would still count as rape. Like for me, that would count as the same. He's making up a new category here, made to penetrate. That, to me, it seems like the same thing, you know?
The made to penetrate categorization of SA is absent in this report, which means it's under...
I guess it depends on how rape is defined. Maybe it is further down that page, but it's not like he shows it.
So to prove with sufficient evidence that an instance of SA did happen when it's not even true is even more difficult, which is why the...
Yeah, but let's just assume that accusations are correct then, right? Because it's hard to prove something is false, therefore it must be correct by default.
Okay, you just didn't understand what I'm actually trying to say. Yes, like I agree that when I said like, well, is 6% of false, then another 94% is true. Like that was false. There's a lot of them in there that are going to be baseless, and baseless just means we can't ever know. And then there's the parts that are true, and then there's some that might be false, but we just don't know because that just hasn't been classified that way, because no evidence has showed up. That's possible.
That's very interesting. Fucking idiot.
vast majority of false allegations never result in a man being arrested, let alone accused or incarcerated. In a study looking back at 216 cases of false allegations, only 30...
If he wants to see that study, it's in the description, and it's actually one of the most comprehensive studies on false allegations. This is looking at all the allegations that have already been proven to be false, and then it's breaking down what is actually happening here. And what is not happening is women just accusing men out of spite, getting them arrested, and ruining their lives. That does not happen. The vast majority of the time, the women who make a false allegation, you wouldn't think about it, but like one of the main reason is that they're trying to serve a different purpose. The reason most of them never name a suspect is because it's not who assaulted them that's important, it's the fact that they were assaulted that's important to their story. And one of the prevalent factors, one of the main patterns in women who make up a story for that, is that you can tell it's a false story because once the lie of them being assaulted has fulfilled its purpose, they never bring it up again. That's one of the main tells that women are making a false allegation. So what it means, for example, is if, for example, you have a teenage girl who was late to school or skipped class, and then she's asked, why weren't you in class? And they know they're in trouble, and they say, I was gang raped. If that gets them off the hook in that moment, they will never bring up the assault again. The only people who will be bringing it up are her parents and the police when questioning her, and then she'll get defensive and she'll start making more shit up until they figure out, okay, she's full of shit. But the point is, one of the main patterns is, once the lie is accomplished, they will not bring it up anymore. Whereas real assault victims have real trauma. You can see it through when they go to therapy. They can see it through friends and family, how they see them, the way they behave, if it's affecting them in some way. That's one of the main tales of a false allegation, and it's something very interesting. And it's one of the things that the study goes into.
39 of them, or 18%, ever named a suspect, but only 6 of them, or 2.7%, led to an arrest, and only 2 of them, or 0.9%.
This is out of a sample of 216. Yeah, what about statistical power again?
Okay, so again, like, if you're going to dismiss a study just because it has a small sample size every single time, I can just deem all of your own studies to have too small of a sample size. It's just as easy. Just as you said, you can't trust any of the studies that I have because it's probably feminist bullshit anyway. Same thing, okay? Same thing. You know, we're operating with the maturity of children here when we do this stuff like this.
Okay, let's look at that. This is reported to the police. 216 were classified by the police as false allegations. However, some of these clarifications were based on police skepticism about victims who were mentally ill, about victims whose statements contained inconsistencies, and about victims who had been drinking or using drugs. Classifying a case as false on these bases, the researchers noted, violated the police agency's own classification rules. Those classification rules stipulate that a case can only be classified as a false allegation if there is clear and credible admission by the complainants, or where there are strong evidential grounds. Applying those agency rules, the researchers recalculated the frequency of false allegations and found that 67 of the 2,643, basically 2.5% case.
Okay, so anyway, the point with that one here is, I think, like, when he was citing the false allegation data, those seem to be the exact same numbers that City Crusher used, and it's the same issue, which is that either it's 8% or it's 2%. It really comes down to how you decide to classify it. I don't really care. In 2% of cases deemed false, they actually had real strong evidence, and in the remaining 6%, they didn't have that strong evidence, so that's it. If you want your data, if you want false allegations to be classified as, well, if we can't find any evidence that it happened, then we should classify it as false automatically, you're free to do that, but that's still completely arbitrary. When it comes to judicial procedures, the point of, you know, when you declare someone guilty of a crime, whether it's assaulting someone, or someone having made a false allegations to slander someone or to get them to ruin their lives or whatever, you're only going to find them guilty of these crimes in court if you have undeniable evidence. The evidence needs to be really, really strong. So that's why it's being counted that way. And what you need to understand is that even when proven false, even when you meet those standards, there are way more people getting away with doing a crime than people actually being found guilty. And there are way more people being found guilty of real assaults than people being found guilty of crimes an assault they did not commit. And tell me, yeah, which is why some rapes are taken to the civil court and not criminal court, where the standard is it's more likely for it to have happened than not. That is true. In civil court, the standards are not the same as criminal court. That is absolutely true.
Then what this...
Oh yeah, this is the one thing that he used. Oh, sorry.
Police officers were asked what proportion of reported rape cases they believed were false allegations. Not all officers offered a numeric response, but those who did answers ranged from 5% of reports to as high as 90, with an overall mean response of 53. Okay, an overall mean response of 53% of false allegations, of rape cases being false allegations, according to police officers' opinion or perception. Now, again, granted, this is just opinion and perception from police officers, but I think it's interesting, and it might suggest...
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It might suggest stuff, you know. You know for a damn fact that if those police officers had given a rate of 5 to 10%, he would say they're all woke feminists and they all hate men. You know for a fact that that's exactly what he would do. You can't look at all of the data I have and say, I don't believe it because it's small sample rates, you don't know anything about data, and then do the exact same thing. Just because you acknowledge that ultimately it does the same thing that you accuse the others of doing, you don't get to slip it in by saying, well, I still think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting perception to have. If you're going to do that, then you need to give the same standard to my data. You can say, well, I don't know about that. I think the sample size is too small, but it's an interesting argument anyway. Maybe we should consider it if we find more studies like this or something. Because otherwise, you're just a hypocrite. And I mean, the fact is you are. You are a hypocrite because that is what you're doing. Again, I could look you straight in the eyes, Shield for Man, and we both know if that number supported my argument, you would reject it out of hand. You're just completely biased. I have my own biases, but you're way worse than me. You are intellectually bankrupt, rather, even more so.
That it's not just 2%, okay? And again, this protected by definition of the sexist legal coding.
Yeah, and this is, okay, well, you want to talk about it? I'll give you my own criticisms of that as well. There are laws. I mean, listen, it was still legal to rape your spouse in the States until like 20, 30 years ago. Like, there are people who are just a bit older than me today that when they were born, it was still legal in many parts of the West to rape your spouse. I think there's a problem with, this is the same as circumcision. Sometimes you look at the laws and you realize that some of the laws are very outdated. They don't reflect the culture and the mentalities anymore, and you really need to update them. I think there was some place, I don't remember where, but there was a thing where they said that, I think it was in the States, maybe even in New York, where they said that the way they classified rape, it included penetration. So you can do anything to somebody, but as long as you don't penetrate, not a rape. Does that make any sense? At the same time, you have places, like I think it's the Nordic countries, I think it was specifically in Sweden. In Sweden, there were two things that happened over a decade ago, which had the far right in panic. The first one is that there was a refugee crisis in Europe. There were a lot of Muslims moving in. And then they saw the rate of sexual assault and rape skyrocket. And a lot of people thought like, oh my God, it must be the Muslim refugees. They're animals. They must be, you know, like just going around raping everybody. What was really happening is that at around the same time, Sweden had just broadly, like very broadly, expanded their own definition of what constitutes sexual assault. And what that meant was that more women were coming forward to report their crimes, and that's all it was. It is true that there are a lot of places where the way the law is designed, it is specifically designed in a way to classify rape when it happens to women, and it's not inclusive enough to talk about when it happens to men. That is absolutely true. And I am absolutely in favor of updating the laws to make sure that if men are indeed assaulted, we have the means to address it and bring, you know, justice and prosecute.
Okay, and this is also the case in many other countries, but also in the UK. These men say women raped them, but the law does not agree. It might have been in the UK where they say that there has to be penetration, but because the man is not being penetrated, it doesn't count as rape. That's because the law is profoundly backward and needs to be like drastically updated. That is totally a problem. I agree. UK is a very feminist country. Just want to point that out. So in summary, this guy do get out is a turd, okay, and I absolutely destroy him. Again, let's debate circumcision and whether or not it's a men's issue.
I already said it's a men's issue. The men's issue is not what Barbarossa said it was. That's it. If you and I are in agreement, then that circumcision should only be done when it's medically necessary, and even then, what constitutes a medical necessity, it needs to be updated, and that means it may not ever be needed anymore. We're already in agreement. And although this is not something I explicitly say in my video, the fact that I say it shouldn't be done unless it's medically necessary should be all it takes for you to understand my position. Like, I really think it's that simple. At the same time, when I make fun of what Barbarossa makes out to be a men's issue, you also need to acknowledge that the claim he makes is completely false. There's no evidence that supports that. There is evidence that supports that women prefer circumcised penises, but that doesn't mean that that's the reason parents do it to their kids. It's not. There's no data for that. So can we just move on? Is there anything else you would like to debate? The main problem that I have right now, and because ultimately you're still doing the exact same thing that CD Crusher did, which is that when the evidence did not agree with you and you were not readily capable of debunking it, you just dismiss it saying, it's probably feminist, so I'm just going to ignore it. If you're just going to do that, well, I appreciate the honesty in the fact that like you just don't want to interact with any data that contradicts your worldview, but it also means that there's no reason to talk at all. If we end up talking and you do like keep bringing up circumcision as if I didn't say the same thing like multiple times, I'm just gonna think you're a complete idiot, frankly. And that was the video. So again, I can appreciate that the guy at least put a lot more effort into showing data, but like, let's be clear, a lot of times he was citing himself, citing his own posts, citing his own articles, citing his own videos, and a lot of the websites he was referencing were also like Manosphere adjacent. One of them was like no more misandry hate or something. Like that's definitely part of that. So I mean, I don't really care to go further on that. Like, but I'll say the same thing for fans of City Crusher and Shield for Men. Like, because I know City Crusher won't talk to me. Shield for Men, maybe he will. I'm still gonna wait for a response. If you guys want to debate anything, the Discord is in my channel description. You can join. Be respectful when you're on my Discord server. There's rules. You're going to see them when you come in. You have to be respectful of those. And if you want to talk to me directly, like you still have the option to talk to me directly. Like you can still DM me and I can see your message. But my channel is literally called Duke It Out. I am ready to duke it out with anybody as long as, they don't spam the N-word or whatever. And they actually have arguments to make. The one thing, and this is again what I'm going to re-emphasize with the Shield for Men and City Crusher, is we need to have like a basic common agreement in just like, being willing to interact with each other's sources. I'm willing to concede if I'm wrong. I'm willing to concede on things that I don't know about. But if I'm showing a source that doesn't agree with you and you just dismiss it out of hand because you don't like it, you're rhetorically bankrupt. There's nothing for us to discuss at all. You have your own worldview, your own vision of your own dimension, and it's not part of the world I live in. So, I guess that leaves it at that. So anyway, well, thanks for everyone who tuned in. Thanks to Lemay for being my budget Jarvis, as Ari just said. Thanks for everybody who tuned in. Apparently there was anywhere from 10 to 15, 20 people at any given time, and I'm not really sure. I feel like a lot of people are just watching and not saying anything, but that's okay. I appreciate you nonetheless. And that's it for today. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.